Over 1,000 people got on the same plane and set a Guinness Book of World Records for the most people ever on one flight. I'll explain how and why they did it. Coming up. Hey 7-4 crew, welcome back. If you don't know me, my name's Kelsey. I'm a 747 pilot. My channel, 7-4 Gear, is all about aviation. Now, if I told you we were going to put 1,000 people on a plane for a humanitarian mission and fly them somewhere, you'd probably guess this would be the plane we'd use. This is the Airbus A380, the largest commercial passenger jet in operation. And that would be a fair guess, but this flight took place in 1991, roughly 16 years before the Airbus A380 was even put into service. But even if the A380 had been around at that time, it still wouldn't have been possible in a standard A380 configuration. This is off the Airbus A380 website, and you can see here the max seating capacity is 853. And if you had ever been lucky enough to fly on an A380, this is a more similar seating configuration of what the plane you were riding on was probably set up like. And you can see right here, it's a long way from the max capacity of 853. In 1991, there was a humanitarian mission named Operation Solomon that took place, and that was to transport over 14,000 people from Ethiopia to Israel. But if the A380 wasn't around at that time to transport people, what did they use to transport over 1,000 people on a single flight? I think you know. This historic flight took place on a Boeing 747 very similar to this one. This is a Boeing 747-200 series. And for all you ab geeks out there, to be precise, it's a 747-258. And if you're thinking, Kelsey, what's a 747-258? I have literally no idea. Here's what I do know. It's a Boeing 747-200 series, and I'm sure if you go into the comment sections, there's going to be some people who are way more knowledgeable on this type of plane than what I know. This was a classic. I never got to fly the classic. The classics are your 747s that are 300 or below. I never got to fly those. Those are the old style 747s that had the flight engineer. Once the 747-400 came out, they got rid of the flight engineer. And then obviously the Dash 8, they made the engines bigger and the plane bigger. Now, even though this 747-200 is a lot older than a Dash 8, it actually has a very similar payload and weight capacity of what it's able to transport, which is really impressive. You can see here, this is the payload of a 747-200 compared to the payload capacity of a 747-8. And the reason I say the payload is important here is because they had a range of people, anywhere from 1,087 to 1,122 people were estimated to be on that flight. And to give you some perspective, when I'm flying passengers on a normal 747-400, we're typically carrying between 400 and 500 people. So this is more than double of the normal seating capacity. So you may wonder, how do they get more than double the people on there and safely take off? Now, while this is not the inside of the 747, this picture was taken during Operation Solomon, and I want you to notice a few things. It's important to notice here that there's no seats or seat belts. So originally I had read that they had actually stripped a 747 passenger berth in order to make all the room for everybody to get on the plane. And then I saw this picture. It appears what they did was send a 747 freighter, which in some ways is smart for a few reasons. Obviously, freighters are built differently than a normal passenger plane, but one of the things you may not notice is that the floor of the main deck on a passenger plane is a lot weaker than the floor of the main deck of a freighter aircraft. And that matters when you're talking about taking a lot of extra weight on that main deck. And also, by having a freighter transport people, you reduce the weight of the seats, galleys, carpets, and bathrooms. And as a pilot, it makes it a lot easier for you to know exactly what the weight of your aircraft is. Think of it like this. If you have a normal 747 passenger berth and you take out the galleys and the seats and the carpet and all that stuff, you're going to remove a lot of weight, but you don't really know exactly how much weight you've removed. If you start with the freighter, you know exactly what your starting weight is. So it makes it a lot easier to know what's your payload, what can you take, how many people, how much do they weigh. You can figure that all out a lot easier because you have a more basic starting weight than you would if you were to take a bunch of stuff out of a 747. So this is what it looks like on the main deck of a 747. Now, this isn't a 200 like they used in this operation, but it gives you an idea of a blank slate of what these pilots were starting with. Now, if you're trying to transport as many people as possible, all that space of galleys and seats and all that stuff is wasted. But in giving up that, you have a much higher risk of safety for the people getting on the plane. So the pilots are making this determination of it's either leave a lot of people behind, which they're in a very dangerous spot, or put them on the plane without any types of seats or seat belts. That's also very dangerous. And they decided that it was safer to bring these people on the flight and get them out of there than leave them behind in Ethiopia where things were going very bad for these people. By using the freighter, the pilots have a much more clear starting number of where they're at. Then they can take an average weight of the people that are getting on the plane. Now in the US, we use a standard weight. Whether you're an 18-year-old who just graduated high school weighing 130 pounds, which is probably what I weighed, or you're a 300-pound sports athlete that's getting on the plane, as far as the airline's concerned, you are one male that's getting on the plane and you weigh the exact same. And then they just take an average. So these pilots would probably take an average of what these people were weighing. Keep in mind, these people were very malnourished, so they're not weighing very much. Right now in the US, this is the standard weight that they're using for an adult male. Just under 200 pounds for some airlines. But when you're transporting a bunch of people who are significantly malnourished, the weight to person ratio is going to be a lot different. And regardless of how many people were on that flight when it took off, they set a new record during the flight. And that's because I read a baby was born. I also saw one source that said 2 babies were born. I was kind of half expecting to see something that said Chuck Norris was the pilot and he was delivering babies while they were flying, but that wasn't the case. This here is actually a picture of the captain who was given special authority to fly this flight with this many people. For those of you that follow me very closely on social media, you probably remember me talking about being one of the pilots that volunteered to be part of the Afghan refugee evacuation that took place last year. And on that flight, I actually had 2 ladies that were very pregnant. We got told during the boarding that these ladies were 9 months pregnant and that there was one of the people that on the plane was a doctor and they were there just in case they were to have a baby. But our flight was going to be 9 hours over the ocean. I was not looking for there to be a medical emergency in flight. So actually when I took my break, one of the things that I did was, well, I went and got snacks, but one of the other things that I did was I went over into the first class area, which is where we put those pregnant ladies, and I went and checked on the flight attendants there to make sure that nothing had gone wrong or they hadn't started the labor, because I wasn't looking to have a big emergency during my flight. So luckily during my 9-hour flight, those babies were not delivered, but during Operation Solomon on this short flight here, which was just 3.5 hours, a baby or 2 babies were born. You always hear me talk about how my #1 priority when I'm flying is safety, and that goes for all pilots that are out there. So you might be thinking, okay, with all those people sitting on the main deck there without seatbelts on, how is that safe? And you're right, it's not very safe. But there's other considerations that you may not have thought of, and one of them is oxygen. All of you have seen videos like this of the oxygen mask falling from the ceiling during a depressurization. And while depressurization is extremely unlikely on any flight, it's something that you do have to plan for in the event that it happens and you have over 1,000 people on your aircraft. But as you look at this photo, you can see just how unpractical it would be to give everybody an oxygen tank or an oxygen generator. That would have taken up a lot of space, which means there's less people that would have been able to get on that aircraft. So what do you do when you have 1,000 people that are on your plane? Well, you can't go to 34 or 36,000 feet, because if you have a depressurization at that altitude, it's going to take you a long time to get down. So these pilots decided to go at 25,000 feet, known as flight level 250. Their logic was that at 25,000 feet, that anywhere along this route, they would be able to quickly descend to 15,000 feet in under 2 minutes. Now, I mentioned before, in the event that your plane rapidly depressurizes, hopefully papers are not flying everywhere, the pilots would be able to get below 15,000 feet very quickly. Now, below 15,000 feet, the air is still thin, but you will be able to breathe. And even at 25,000 feet, you'll be able to breathe. You just won't be able to do it for a long time. You may remember that air traffic control video where the plane had depressurized and the guy sounded really drunk. It would just sound and feel like you were drunk. You would become euphoric, which means you wouldn't really realize how dangerous of a situation you were actually in. So it wouldn't be too terrible, but your pilots would hopefully be getting you down to 10 to 15,000 feet quickly, so you were able to breathe normally and not have to worry about it. So their strategy was, let's go at 25,000 feet. That way, if we have a real problem, we can get down below 15,000 feet very quickly. 5,000 foot a minute, that'd be very easy to do on a plane like this. I'm not sure if it was the pilots or the dispatchers or who came up with that idea, but they were able to transport over 14,000 people in 36 hours. And that's how they set the Guinness Book of World Records for having over 1,000 people on a single flight. It's unbelievable to me, and I fly the 747 as a passenger plane, I fly the 747 as a freighter, and I just cannot imagine having 1,000 people on my aircraft at one given time. Now, if you want to see something else that's unbelievable, check out Hollywood's aviation explanation here. And if you want to see a video where some pilots are actually struggling to fly their plane, check out this video up here. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.